Okay, good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock. We have a workshop tonight, and I'll call upon Kristen Rush to make sure we're really all sitting up here.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember McGough. Councilmember Miller.
Here.
Okay, all present and accounted for. Mr. Devon, tonight we have a workshop on community engagement, visioning, and strategic planning.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this workshop is the culmination of an effort that we made and we indicated to you that we would make based on input from all of you. You indicated that you wanted engagement. You indicated that you wanted additional input from the community. And you included this as something that we were to accomplish as part of our in association with the City Council strategic plan this year. So we heard you, and we worked very hard, and members of our staff, particularly Jessica Prosser, Carice Canales, Anessa Janes, did a great job of working with our community to bring this visioning project to life, and we're very proud to present it tonight, and we'll lead off with Jessica starting the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. We are excited tonight to share with you the results of our community visioning process that we have branded Arvada. So tonight we'll go through the process of collecting outreach from the public, reaching out to a diverse range of our population, and highlight some of the key things that we've heard from the community. But first, I wanted to just again acknowledge our staff project team. Mark just reached out and most everybody.
I'm not sure that mic seems like it's cutting out, or you're...
Testing.
That's...
Oh, there we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to acknowledge our staff project team. So Michelle Broski, Cindy Javale, Anessa Janes, and Carice Canales. This group, and Maria also helped before she left, obviously, really came together to make this happen in a pretty short amount of time. So with that said, Council requested this at the beginning of the year, and really the key things that we laid out to do with this community visioning process was, one, include community input as a basis for Council creating their new strategic plan. This is something we've evolved from since our last strategic planning process. Establish a community vision that resonates with Council and the community to really feel like we're kind of on the same page there. Dig a little bit deeper into the citizen survey results. Establish an ongoing online engagement platform. This is something we identified as kind of a gap in our toolkit for having feedback loops with the community. Reaching populations we don't always hear from through our typical planning process, and really being able to see Arvada's future through the community's eyes. So basing our approach and what projects and things that we wanted to ask the community on was started with the citizen survey. So if you remember last year about this time, we got the 2017 citizen survey results back, and included in that was a list of key drivers. These are things that if the city invested in and put effort, resources into, they would drive up satisfaction rates within the community. So these are things like sense of community, growth and economic development, being transparent, congestion, road conditions, safety in parks, and things like that. So we started both with those key drivers to develop the questions we would ask the community, as well as all of the visioning statements from our long-range planning documents. In our comprehensive plan, in our bike master plan, in our parks master plan, in our arts and culture plan, all of those plans have vision statements that the community has had input on. So being able to kind of marry those key drivers from the citizen survey along with the visioning statements from our long-range planning documents, we were able to create sort of a baseline framework for the types of things that we would ask the community. So with all of that, we were able to then launch Speak Up Arvada on August 1st. So you might recall we kind of laid out our process for how we were going to approach visioning for you when we had a workshop on July 9th. And we wanted to make sure that we had kind of a two-pronged approach. One being an online engagement platform where we can have sort of virtual community forums as well as in-person engagement. And we were able to accomplish that through hiring 8 community connectors, which proved to just be fabulous individuals, and were able to represent different parts of our population throughout Arvada. So at this point, I would like to have each of the community connectors introduce themselves, and then we are going to hear from 2 of them about what their experiences were like outreaching to people in person across all different venues throughout the city. And Charlie's not going to go first. So why don't, if you all can just hop up here real quick and just say your name, that would be great. And then we're going to hear from Mark Hoffman and Brittany Coffey just for a couple minutes about their experiences. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dawn Scott.
And I'm Coffee Charlie Alt.
Crystal Anderson.
Richie Averill.
Brittany Coffey.
Good evening, I'm Mark Hartman. Okay. So I was asked to give you a couple of minutes of my experiences. One of the photos up there is mine. It's at the fire station at the fire day. That was one of the events that I attended. I tried to make sure that I went to different events, try to encompass different demographics, different parts of Arvada. I started focusing out on the senior citizens, primarily because my mother's been here longer than I have. I've been here my whole life. So anyway, it sort of morphed into different community events, and I felt like I really talked from the very young and the very short to the tall and the not so young. And it was a very interesting and enjoyable experience, and got a lot of input, I think, that helps you guys find a direction. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Brittany Coffey again. So my experience was kind of the opposite a little bit of Mark. I have 2 young kids sitting right up there. I couldn't find a sitter. So anyway, I really reached out to families, and I kind of outsourced my own personal network. I visited schools, playgrounds, preschools, some churches, and really tried to reach out to the people that looked like me and had kids, and kind of tried to pick their brains about what their vision for Arvada was. And that was really interesting because I kind of got opposite spectrums of answers, things I didn't expect, and things that kind of were also in line with what my personal opinions are too. So that was a lot of fun. And Mark spoke to some of those events up there. I also did some stuff with Dawn. We did the Arts and Ales, which is at the Arvada Center. I also did some senior stuff with her, which was a good experience too. Seniors are feisty. They're really fun to listen to, and they have a lot of input, and I really feel like they are a voice that has not been really heard all that well in the community, so it was really fun to talk to them. But I really enjoyed it. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun. And I will hand it off to Carice.
I always have to adjust this because I'm much shorter. So good evening, counselors. And I want to thank all of our community connectors for all of their efforts to make sure that our Speak Up Arvada platform reached as many people as possible. So I'm here to talk about who we did reach. So our team was very intentional when we started this journey to make sure that we found a platform that was flexible and that allowed us to engage people where they were already gathering, and really to make it as accessible as possible to all of our community members. So as Jessica mentioned, we used a 2-pronged approach to achieve this. So we had our in-person engagement with our community connectors, and then we used all of our communication tools like the Arvada report, social media, Nextdoor, to really drive people to the online site. So I am happy to report that from August through October of our outreach efforts, Speak Up Arvada had over 6,000 people visit the site. Of those, were 750 people participated. And what's important to note with that is that the national benchmark for having a very successful platform is about 10%. So we surpassed that by a significant amount. And in the month of October, we were the most active engagement site in the country. So we're very proud of that. On the side of our community connectors, that with their in-person engagement, they conducted over 150 in-person interviews and presentations to HOAs and schools, festivals, resource fairs, just to name a few. And they conducted over 700 hours of outreach. So they really hit the pavement hard and did a great job. One of our community connectors who was not able to make it tonight, she in particular tried really hard to reach our Spanish and Russian speaking populations, as well as our low-income residents through outreach at WIC, Head Start, and the Veggie Van. So, we really engage residents from all over the city, from north to south and east to west. So as you can see on the map, we were able to track engagement on Speak Up by zip code and also by age demographics. And you can see that 80004, that zip code had the highest portion of participants at 28.5%. And that was really because it's the highest density zip code. But you can see throughout the city that we had really good representation in all the different zip codes. You can also see with the round pie charts, that's the demographic breakdown of by age in each of the different zip codes. So you can see, for example, where you see a larger blue piece of the pie, that's our youth engagement, and that was directly correlated to outreach that our connectors had done at high schools like Ralston Valley High and Arvada Senior High. So, as you could have probably predicted, when we're doing our outreach, we're really good at reaching our population from age 30 to 60, and that's because Arvada is really a family community. Historically, we've had pretty good touch points there, but our team was very intentional in trying to reach our teenagers and our seniors, who are typically left out of our traditional engagement processes. So our community connectors attended high school civics classes, they went to the skate park, they went to senior living facilities, and even to Silver Sneakers clubs. So they tried to be very strategic with that by going to where these groups are already gathering. And you can see on the chart that for 19 years and under, the blue, we had 10% there. And for our senior population at 70 years and older, we were at 11%. So that was really amazing to see. Our young people really appreciating having their voices heard, which for a lot of them it was the first time. The one group that we had lower participation with was our 20-year-olds. And that's really because Arvada isn't a huge hub for that age group. We don't have a big university. But other than that, we've been very pleased with the age demographics that we reached. But what really helped us to drive all of this engagement was that we talked about what the community wanted to talk about. So just as a reminder, we chose our 10 project topics using the citizen survey key drivers. And so these are topics where the community told us that if we addressed them, that we'd see more significant jumps in levels of satisfaction. So we covered topics ranging from the city's vision to housing to getting around town all the way to neighboring. So we'd like to take some time right now to highlight a few of these projects so you can get a sense of what kind of feedback we received. And all of them will be in the report that you'll receive after this presentation. But it's important to note that many of the ideas and the themes that emerged cut across multiple topics. And so this really tells us that these are important to our community. So I'd like to pass it off to Jessica to dig into what we actually heard.
Thank you, Carice. So, this next slide shows a representation of the types of ideas that we heard through this process. We received hundreds of open-ended responses to the questions that we asked. We also asked questions through a simple survey format, through quick polls, and through an interactive mapping tool that's provided on the online engagement platform. For each of these individual different ideas that came through, we read through every one of them, and we gave each of them a tag with a different type of individual identifying of the idea. And as we started to go through them, these ideas became repetitive. And so we ended up with about 50 different ideas that were overarching throughout the different projects with all of the different open-ended responses. And then from there, we were able to start creating some themes that created these different values for the community. So for example, this is the question that was the real visioning question of what do you want to see Arvada to be in 2028? And so for this, if you kind of start from the bottom and look up, the red lines are the different times that that same idea was mentioned. So for example, 29 people said that they would like to have more connectivity within Arvada. And the blue lines are the number of times that someone liked that idea. So this goes to the sort of crowdsourcing ability of using this online engagement tool. If you think of kind of a virtual dot exercise, we're not in a community meeting together where people throw up ideas and then people can prioritize them with dots. We're doing it virtually online. So those are the differences between the two different colors there. And so we did this for every one of the different projects where we asked an open-ended question. And then we were able to distill the different ideas that rose to the top and overlay that with the number of people that also liked those same ideas. So this was for the visioning piece. And then
Jessica.
these are the different.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Mr.
Hey,
Pfeiffer.
Jessica, can you go back? What is connectivity? What is that? What does that meaning? In this
So
graph?
these were things like trail connections, sidewalk gaps. Somebody might have said, I wish I could walk to the grocery store.
So they just mentioned that word, and then people are is in that comment theme, and then they liked it.
Right. So
So-
they may not have said the actual word connectivity, but what they were explaining, we decided that any comment that's like this gets the tag connectivity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just trying to differentiate mobility versus connectivity.
So mobility was a little bit more like mode of transport, a little bit broader than just there being sort of a gap.
I think they're pretty close
They're
because
similar.
connectivity tells me, can I get somewhere to get on
Right.
mass transit?
Right.
You know, and you know, mobility could be trails.
Right. So I'm going to flip to the next slide and show you what we did with that, and then
Okay.
if you want to dig deeper, and we can definitely do that. So for several of them, they were similar, right? So we then took them and made them higher level themes. So we said that getting from here to there is an overarching theme. So we combined connectivity, mobility, the mapping tools where people said, you know, they put different things on a map, and we went through these to aggregate them into higher level themes, which then we put into value statements based on those. So the value statements that we came out of with all of those different 50 tags, putting them into different buckets, was a community for all, having inclusivity, being open to anyone living in our community, getting to know each other, and these were a lot of the communication, engagement, volunteerism themes that we saw, getting from here to there, which is again the kind of connectivity and mobility themes, resources for our future. These were the comments around waste hauling and sustainability, energy, a safe and clean community. Those were things like beautification, safety concerns, and then building and sustaining Arvada's character, which really went to the comments around growth and maintaining our character while we grow into the future. So these were the overarching value statements that came out of our visioning questions. So then to highlight a few of the different project areas that we asked about, we applied that same methodology of tagging all the individual comments, taking into account the survey questions, and then coming up with the top ideas. So you can see for housing, the top ideas that came through are listed on the top, and then those overarching community value statements that relate to those different ideas are listed at the bottom. So for housing, the community for all and building and sustaining Arvada's character is what came through, while these individual top ideas were specific for housing. This is an example for the development questions that we asked. We used a quick poll, and we used this on a few of the different projects to just kind of pull people in. We did a couple visual preference surveys around public art and affordable housing, and sort of quick polls where you were able to just sort of, quickly show what you thought, and then be able to then take a survey and then provide open-ended ideas. And so we did multiple different sort of methods for collecting input. So from here, just for this one, we thought it was kind of interesting. Sometimes it feels like the rhetoric in Arvada is way too much growth all the time, slow down. And when we ask the question, it's really a little bit more 50-50 with people's responses here. So again, when we asked the growth and development open-ended questions, these were the top things that came up when we asked the community, development is inevitable. What would you like to see the city keep in mind as we grow? And then the top ideas were things like connectivity, traffic congestion, inclusive community, mixed-use development, and then there's the value statements that reflect those different ideas that we heard. For communication, we asked the question of how do you like to receive information from the city? And people overwhelmingly said their top two things are the Arvada report and Nextdoor for the existing ways that they like to receive information. Again, this goes back to that key driver question from the citizen survey where transparency and that two-way communication with the city was highlighted as something that would improve satisfaction ratings. And then when we asked the open-ended question of how would you like to receive information, or what are your ideas for communicating both with the city and with resident to resident, the themes that came about were more real-time communication opportunities, more opportunities for community engagement, and more volunteer opportunities throughout the community. And then again, we were able to then relate those value statements to the different things that we heard through how people wanted to speak, and overwhelmingly we had getting to know each other as a key community value. The last one that we wanted to highlight was around mobility. And for this one, we asked questions that directly correlated to our mobility index, which is one of council's existing strategic results. And we asked, what is the most important thing for the future of transportation? And the top idea that came through was convenient and easy to use. And again, this sort of drove our key value statement around being able to get from here to there on a kind of simplistic basis. So all of this and all of the input that we put together, those value statements, we translated them into community visioning statements. These are draft statements. These are, for council's consideration. We feel like these statements really reflect what we heard from the community and are things that if you put those back out to the community and said, is this what we heard? Does this resonate with the community? The community would feel like they're encompassing of the different things that we asked about. So they are, we envision an Arvada that embraces its small town traditions to achieve an inclusive, prosperous, and resilient community of neighborhoods where quality housing is attainable to all. We envision an Arvada that prioritizes quality of life defined by connected, safe neighborhoods where we care for our neighbors and enjoy access to our incredible network of parks and open space. We envision an Arvada that supports a safe, effective, and efficient transportation system, including access to the greater metropolitan area, transit opportunities, and improved connectivity to our many recreational assets. And we envision an Arvada that provides a full range of municipal services to its residents, one that engages effectively and allocates sufficient resources to meet growing and changing needs of our community. So that's where we're at with what the community has put together in 5 statements of what is our community vision from all of that outreach. So at this point, in terms of next steps for strategic planning for council, I believe you all have seen this diagram before, but just to kind of reiterate, where you're getting the kind of what we heard from the community tonight. On the 17th, council will do their own brainstorming session around what they would like to see moving forward in the next strategic plan. Our base camps during the 4th quarter have had priorities coming from our different work systems throughout the city, which are reflective of council's priority areas, and so those are being compiled right now. Staff is putting together a Google site with all of that information like we have done before for you all, and we will be having, council will be hosting a community engagement open house on January 8th to present these different vision statements to the community and hear anything else that the community has to say, and then moving into the retreat on January 18th. So this is sort of the first of many things. There will also be some workshops on December 10th that will kind of feed into all of this. So that is all we had for tonight. We will be following up. We have an appendix with every comment that we received and all of the survey information, and with your comments tonight, moving forward, we'll be finalizing a report that will have that appendix and then the components of this presentation. So we're ready for comments and questions.
Very good. Let me lead off by thanking the community connectors for being part of this process and for being our boots on the ground to go out and get us some information that's obviously going to be very useful to us. It's great to hear from our citizens. I'm not coming up with any great surprises from what is being presented to us so far. I think it's very consistent with where council's been trying to put its attention. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Marriott.
Thank you. Jessica, can you come back up? I have a question for you. Can you put the back onto those 4 visioning statements?
Yeah.
There you go, that one. So I understand, or it looks to me like these were an attempt to kind of weave everything into a couple of statements, kind of everything you heard. But I'm taken by a couple of these things. They're kind of, they're more nuanced than simple in a visioning statement. Like for instance, I look at the first one and it talks about where quality housing is attainable to all. And so that, that kind of weaves into the vision this idea of attainable housing, which another way of saying it, maybe a more crude way of saying it, is subsidized housing. But yet, that's such a larger, more detailed conversation, like you take a lot of neighborhoods and here's a good example. We've heard loud and clear from the neighbors around the Pomona parcel that they don't want housing there, and other places where you say, well, how, in your neighborhood, where are you willing to have a 5-story, 100-unit apartment complex with 60 parking spaces? Tell me where that can go. And it's, well, somewhere else, and so when I look at these statements, I just worry about, the details matter so much in some of these conversations that, by putting them into things like this before the detailed conversations have happened, you're kind of almost charting a course before there's a course to chart. I mean, does that make any sense to you? What kinds of discussions did you have about that, or what kinds of things did the community say about those kinds of things, other than just the broad general term of I want affordable housing for all? I mean, I don't think anybody can be against that, but the details is where it gets to be really tough.
Yeah, I think reading through the comments when asked for people to tell their stories about how they've struggled to find housing, keep housing in Arvada is pretty eye-opening. The connectors went to the food bank, they went to the WIC clinic, to places where we don't always hear the stories from those folks. They're not usually the ones that are, emailing staff or council members to tell their story. I think overwhelmingly, when we asked about housing, there was a wide array of responses, which you would expect from a community like ours that has a wide range of demographics. So certainly, housing seems to be something that keeps coming up in the community, and it came up through this process, and so that was why, we added it in here. And again, these are draft statements. They could be broadened, they could be narrowed. We could add, individual ones, and then, it's up to council to take this, and then as you move forward through the next steps with strategic planning, that's why we didn't want to have, anything final for tonight. We wanted to get this kind of input as we move forward.
Okay, interesting because I'm just curious about the depth or the level of detail of these conversations that our community connectors have had with folks, that led to the development of these kind of statements. How did that get there?
Right, and certainly other people said, I want to have income potential on my property, and I value ADUs, right. And I'd like to be able to subdivide my lot if I want to. And so there was a broad spectrum of different things. Okay. So if you kind of go back to the slide on housing, you can see that those top ideas that came through definitely and certainly had attainable and affordable housing, but they also had aging in place, diverse housing stock, tiny homes, mixed income housing incentives. So there's other ideas that came through. Those were the top ideas. And so the sort of then value statement is attainable housing for all. Out of this is sort of, how can we be a community where people can live here?
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McGough.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I have a few questions. One, I think Ms. Canellis mentioned about one of the neighborhood connectors had made strong efforts to connect with the Spanish-speaking and Russian community. I'm wondering how successful that was, and also whether there were connections made with the Asian community within our city.
So the community connector was Jamie, and she already had ties to WIC and Head Start before starting this job, and she is also bilingual in Spanish. So she really focused her efforts on reaching that population. We also partnered with a church called La Iglesia Real over on Wadsworth and 68th, and they're, I believe, our only Latino church in Arvada. And so she would go visit their food pantry. I think she visited it 4 or 5 times throughout this process, and she spoke to a lot of Spanish speakers. They did have some Russian there. They pretty much had to wait on translation that was available, and I think that was a challenge. None of our connectors spoke Russian, but through their networks and relationships, they did as much as they could.
And so did we have some connection into the Asian community too?
I don't believe so. I looked at the demographics, and it was Spanish, Russian, and one person that spoke Afrikaans.
Okay. So when we get the report, will there be more detailed information about the numbers and the location of those who contributed, from those who bring or have maintained a different culture from the mainstream culture within the city?
So the appendix that Jessica mentioned
Okay.
will have every single comment and breakdown of demographics, and we'll
Okay.
be putting in a lot of different charts to show it.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question too.
Sure.
Just not troubled by, but I just have a question to say. What do we mean by the character of Arvada? I mean, I'm thinking of the the old story about people grasping at the elephant, and depending on which part of the elephant, they describe it quite differently. And I'm wondering if it might be the case with where people live within the community, or how long they've lived in the community, or the experience they brought with them to the community, whether they might describe the character. And I'm not quite sure how, I can't come to from what you've given so far, I can't come to an understanding of what's meant by maintaining the character of Arvada.
So if I remember correctly, a lot of the comments that we read through mentioned the small town feel and, it was a great place to raise your family. We have connector Mark Hartman, who's been here his entire life and, seen a lot of change, but, people talked about what the true values to Arvada were and that we needed to try to maintain those. So I think a lot of it just had to be around figuring out how to grow, but how to also maintain the values like Old Town. A lot of people mentioned that they loved Old Town, but maybe they wanted to have something similar to that on the west side. That geographic equity that we saw as one of our themes.
Do we see any significant difference in those who, say, are on the far west side, who may be new to Arvada, who may be new to Colorado, and who may have almost no connection to the Old Town area? Are their responses any different? How do those get factored in?
Do you want to speak to that? Because again, we heard a lot about geographic equity and that, there's different pieces of Arvada that have their own character or identity. So some may not go from Candelas to Old Town all the time, but they have their own values that they see on the west side. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add with that kind of geographic equity was equity in terms of services provided. So we heard a lot around, there was a lot of folks that had sort of 80th and Wadsworth. Can we have an Old Town feel? Can we have mixed use in our part of town? And it wasn't just that they wanted opportunities for shopping or eating, they wanted opportunities to gather. And so that sort of character piece was, we want the character and feel of Old Town in our own neighborhood so we can walk there and gather and have those opportunities for engagement, not just in one part of the city, but across the city. So that theme wasn't necessarily more on the east side versus the west side, but it was, can we create that type of community feel in the different parts? And with that kind of came this kind of hyper-local delivery of services theme, where we have the park within a 10-mile walk of every neighborhood, and that's a community, sort of gathering space. But we heard, can we have communications be at that hyper-local scale? Could we, have the Arvada report for the different parts of the city? Or could we, like we do on Nextdoor, we only put things out for different areas that pertain to them? So those were some of the things where it wasn't necessarily just the physical, what is Arvada's character, but it was kind of what is really the feel of Arvada mean to people.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Well, first, I want to also thank the community connectors and Ms. Ford, because I think it was Nancy's persistence in making sure that we made it to this stage of the conversation. So thank you for everybody who's putting in a lot of time and effort. A couple of questions and a couple of comments, but really, I might have seen the vision statements a little bit differently than Mr. Marriott, in the sense that, to me, these appeared to be starting points for a discussion. Because I would agree that, there are a lot of details that would wrap around any one of these words or any one of the things that go on in any one of these statements. But for me, it feels like an opportunity to dive deeper. And I think that's where council comes into play as we, approach our strategic planning session and what those conversations will really look like and how these will really then be fleshed out. But just a couple of questions, and it may have been touched on just a little bit, but in the first one, small town traditions. Was there anything that was that stuck out as what a small town tradition looks like in Arvada? Is that the Arvada? Is that the Harvest Festival? Is that, what are those traditions?
I think they were broad. Anything from, a community event, something like the Harvest Festival, to we have an annual 4th of July picnic in our neighborhood every year, which feels like a small town thing to do with our neighborhood of 300 people kind of a thing. Do you have anything else you want to add? Jump in.
Just as general as knowing your neighbor came up a lot as a value and something that people wanted to maintain in Arvada, regardless of how the city grows and changes and evolves.
Okay, well, thank you. And then, as it relates to the last statement where it talks about municipal services, what is it that they were asking for and about as it relates to municipal services, and what's not available maybe today in their eyes, and any thoughts on that?
Again, the just kind of geographic equity of services. So, maybe if, having, parks that are well maintained, roads that are well maintained, waste hauling services that were equal kind of came up, even though the city doesn't provide that, people don't understand that. So things where it's sort of a level playing field, that whatever your service level of delivery is on the north, south, east, or west side of town, you can expect the same level of service across the city.
So did that play into our community policing at all? Was there any comments around kind of that strategy that the city's adopted, and getting back to kind of the safe, the safe and quality of life? I mean, were our police officers brought up in regards to any of this? Just curious.
They were. So to answer the first part of your question, the sector-based policing goes again to that hyper-local kind of delivery and engaging people across the city. With a city as large as ours, that's kind of the trend of where people are going. And I would say that safety doesn't show up as high on the things of sort of what do you envision, because we already score really well with safety, and that's already a measure and a benchmark when we look at safe community and your quality of life scores, both in our citizen survey and looking at this. It's not coming up because people feel safe, and so that's good. So if safety had been the number one thing up there, we would have certainly presented that and really called that out, but it's not showing up. So I don't think that devalues what our police department does or anything. It's just inherently the way we are.
Well, I think it supports the fact that we're getting high ranks in our survey with regard to safety and our community policing. And I think that the move to community policing several years ago was the right thing to do, and this is just supporting that decision to do that. So again, I really appreciate the work that your committee and all of the community connectors have done, and probably will continue to do as this continues to play out. I'm sensing that this isn't the end of what work they might have to do. So thank you very much for presenting this tonight.
Ms. Ford?
So I too will thank the community connectors, because I got to meet a few of them very well. So I would like to continue on Mr. McGough's comments, because as I read a lot of the comments, I too saw that with the Arvada's character and the small town feel. And as I was reading, it occurred to me that I have a feeling that people have a very different opinion on what a small town feel, what that really means. And so when I see that, it seems to me that those two areas would be good starting points if we were to continue to look at Arvada from a branding perspective, or a perspective of differentiating Arvada from other cities. What do people mean when they say a small town feel? Is that related to safety, because they feel safe and they know their neighbors, but yet they're still wanting lots of entertainment and other amenities that you might not find in a small town? And what does Arvada's character, what is Arvada's character? What does that really mean? And, because again, I think that's going to depend on who's saying that, long-term residents versus new residents, and so forth. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, Jessica, was in terms of pinning the favorite places on the map, what came about from that? what did you organize those locations to say that the greatest number of pins were parks or were trails, or what were they?
We'll certainly do that in the final report, and we could even pull up the map right now. But there are places that you would expect. So we asked, what are the places you love in Arvada? Pin them and then provide a comment. Majestic View Nature Center, Old Town. A lot of our neighborhood parks came up. Some people put their favorite restaurant. Some people put their house because they, love their backyard. I mean, so it was very broad across the city, but those sort of activity hubs of, where you would think that, what are the places you love in Arvada definitely rose to the top. But they're all on kind of a heat map on the map, so you can see the areas, and then, as people said, I like that place, you can see another few people click the same place as well.
I also want to just add one thing. Go ahead.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
So another piece of the mapping tool was we could see where there were love deserts. So where there weren't really any big assets, I know it's a weird term, but.
That's where us divorce attorneys work.
But you get what we mean. It's places in Arvada where maybe we should think about adding some new. And especially where we see high concentrations of those pins that they love, those are important to replicate. So as we continue to develop, that will guide us.
Or to understand why they love them.
Yes. And
Because, it makes me think, something that keeps going through my mind is a story that was in the Denver Post about 2 weeks ago. And it was on, one was a very well-known bar and believe restaurant, and the other one I think was a restaurant too. They were both being sold because new development was coming in. And the thing that really struck me is that can those places truly be replicated? There's a reason why they're very popular, and I don't think that they necessarily can be replicated. I'm reading a very interesting book right now by a woman named Jane Jacobs. It's a seminal book on urban planning. Have you read that book?
Oh, yeah.
You're shaking your head. It's totally throwing me for a loop because she's talking about sidewalks, a big thing. And that was something that I think came out very strongly in this information that I read, is that how I interpreted it was the connectivity of our streets and sidewalks, or the lack of connectivity of our sidewalks. To me, that came out very, very strong. And also the fact that a number of people made comments about wanting more restaurants and things of that nature, some entertainment type things that, of course, the city is not able to do anything about. And so, and even if we create them, there's no guarantee that they're going to be interesting to people. If you really think about what this woman, Jane Jacobs, is talking about as far as what makes them interesting. So I thought that was very, very interesting because it surprised me, but not really. So.
And I think one of the things that Jane Jacobs would agree with is that we need to foster community gathering spaces. And that was something that we gleaned from the places that people love with the pin dropping. They could drop a pin on the asset and then put comments. This is a great place to gather with my neighbors, or, take the dogs for a walk with our friends.
Well, and she also talks about interesting places. Places that have interesting things that draw people to them. So, and again, that can be subjective, but, she talks, one thing, she talks about there, though, is city versus suburbs. And one of the things that she talks about, what makes cities, not suburbs, cities so interesting, is that you have that tremendous mix of business. You have people constantly looking at the sidewalks. There's lots of activity. People feel safe because there is that activity, and there's lots of people looking at the sidewalks, and there's just a lot of things there. So it's very different. I mean, you can't necessarily compare a city with the suburbs, but you can certainly look at some of the aspects that she's talking about and see how, you know, what activities, how can we make our parks and other areas of our city interesting for people to gather, as you say.
Great, thank you. Mr. Pfeiffer?
So, great job, everyone. I appreciate what you guys all do. The only few items I have is that small town traditions. I think I was thrown for a loop like Mr. Jones. I think traditions is the word, maybe not the right word. I always think character. If you want to define character, small town character, I mean, I think we all talk about it, and I don't want to wordsmith this, but traditions in that sentence doesn't make sense to me. So maybe that's where we're all getting stuck on that first one. And also, attainable is a word we've been using for a while, and I think that it's appropriate because, if I recall correctly, what the mayor's always used it is, it depends on what your means of what you can acquire and what you can afford, and that's attainable. Like, you could be making a 7-digit job or 5-digit annual job, and you can afford what you can. We just have to make sure there's diversity in our housing stocks. So I appreciate the attempt on that. The other thing is if you go back and look at, I don't know what page it is, but when you have your graphs that show kind of the response with mobility, connectivity, waste hauling, so forth, yeah, that one, you almost have your 4 buckets in there. I don't know if we hit the mark just yet because it doesn't seem like we talk a lot about beautification. I almost think Old Town in a way, sustainability and waste hauling kind of fit in some sort of category. I don't know what that may or may not be, but there's some relationships in there that I don't know spell out in those visions. But I see what your results are. I don't quite see that we captured them all in the 4. So maybe you can help that. But I think you're on the right path, and I think you're going the right direction. Just I think we want to make sure that we keep the essence of what folks have told us, and we don't lose any of these in the visioning opportunity. So.
Thank you.
Great. When you talk about the character of Arvada, for years I have described Arvada as Mayberry on steroids, and I think that's still accurate. Ms. Miller?
I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out why you weren't calling on me. I had pushed my speak button and not my request to
Well, that
speak
would be
button.
why.
So this is why I never say anything at a council meeting. I don't press the right button ever. So first, thank you. I love this. And I'm all in with Neighbors Connected. I built a front porch just to connect with my neighbors this year. So I love everything, and I've got a full page for our retreat now of thoughts that I'm very excited about. It's a little small page, but I wrote small. So anyway, I just want to say thank you. And one word that I didn't see in any of the 4 bullet points was the word sustainability. That was one word that I didn't see in there. But the other thing that I would love to hear more about is the deserts, the love deserts.
Yeah.
I really want to hear more about that. And I also wrote down that it is my sincere hope that Speak Up Arvada isn't just a one-time thing. I would love to see this be always and not ever stop. You know, I really would love, I hope that that's what's intentional here.
So to that note, one of the great things about this platform, we absolutely intend for it to be our ongoing engagement. And Cindy Javelet has been working tirelessly to work with other department staff to figure out what other topics can we dive into next. She has this whole schedule lined up for things that we can dive into.
And the other thing is, if council identifies things at the retreat, or I've even heard a few things today where, what does that really mean? Can we dive in a little bit more? We'll throw it up here and, connect with our neighborhood leaders and connectors and get out there for that same type of community engagement on an ongoing basis. And we did partner with Public Works, and we partnered with Economic Development. Already through this, we asked a question about ADUs because it was prominent in the Land Development Code process. So there's opportunities to, continue this online engagement platform and have continuous feedback loops with the public on an ongoing basis.
That's great. Very good. Good work by everybody. Mr. Devon, anything else you need from us tonight?
No, Council, but I would, again, on behalf of staff, thank you to the community connectors and our staff that did this. And frankly, thank you to all of you. Your comments were outstanding. I wrote them all down. I'd love to get Dot's little page, maybe a copy of it at some point. I think, as David said, this is the beginning of a conversation. And I think more conversation at the council retreat and then ongoing conversation using this platform is exactly what we've envisioned. And you all have been intentional about asking for this input and trying to get information from the community, not once every 2 years as we've done through the community survey, but on an ongoing basis, using technology, using engagement as a way of doing this. And it was Nancy that pushed us in that direction. As staff, we took us a while to figure out exactly what was in mind, but we kept working at it until we came back with this. And this isn't the end. I think this is the beginning, and we'll continue to work on an ongoing engagement tool with our community so that we can feed information to you and co-create the kind of community that is desired.
Well, to take something from Mr. Marriott's comments and Mr. Jones's comments, and to constantly bring back Don Howard, the devil's in the details. And we've got a lot of details to work through. With that, we stand adjourned. Everybody have a great evening.